Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm going to draw some still life. I'm going to do a colored pencil drawing of this autumn leaf with some drops on it. Let's start. First I'm going to do the sketch with an ochre colored pencil, and the reference will be in the description. You can see that in the reference you can't see the full shape of the leaf, so I had to improvise a little bit, add a few details. The pencils I'm working with are Faber-Castell Polychromos colored pencils, and the surface I'm working with is 1000 grit sandpaper. One of my favorite surfaces when it comes to working with colored pencils. So like I said, I'm just doing a quick freehand sketch of the shape of the leaf. It doesn't have to be perfect, and I'm going to add the missing details. The size of the paper, by the way, is around 9 times 11 inches, so it's not going to be a small drawing, even though it's a relatively simple one. I don't often draw still life, but as there are lots of fallen leaves on the streets nowadays, or these days, I felt like doing one of these autumn scenes. So the sketch is almost done. Like I said, I had to fill in a few missing details. Now I'm going to start working on the background. The background is also interesting because I'm going to have to kind of invent detail in there as well. From what I can tell in the reference, the leaf is on the ground. I don't know if it's muddy ground, or maybe there are some rocks or mud there. I'm not really sure how to interpret all of the details I see. But I see some greenish tones and some dark brownish tones, so I started by laying down some of these colors. I put down a little bit of darker green, a bit of brown, and a bit of this ochre. I want a mix of colors in there, and a little bit of dark pine green. And then I did some blending with a brush just to push the pigment into those gray spaces of the sandpaper. And once that was done, I started working with a black colored pencil. With a black pencil, I'm going to do a couple of different things. I'm going to indicate where some of these larger cracks or shadow areas are, to kind of divide that background into some smaller segments. But I'm also going to drag the pencil and create a bunch of small marks to create something that looks like a texture that reminds of the muddy ground, maybe. Because I'm going to try to make it look like a muddy ground or a mossy ground, something like that, with some greenish and brownish tones. But in order for me to accomplish that, I need to add an illusion of detail. So I can't really draw every single lump of dirt or every single stone or anything like that. I need to find a quicker and easier way to create that illusion of detail, and you can easily do that with a darker pencil just by dragging it, controlling the shape and the length and the size of your marks. Because as long as you keep your marks and strokes a little bit shorter, you'll be able to produce a finer looking texture. In some areas there will be a little bit more shadow, a little bit more of those dark areas, like for example here where I'm working on this area under the leaf, because the light is coming from above, so there's going to be more shadow there, and I'm just going to make the ground darker in that area. I'm continuing to work on the left side, the bottom left side of the drawing, just to fill that in with a little bit of green and maybe some brownish colors before I move in with the black. The order in which I approached working on the background was the usual order. Basically I'm working from left to right and from top to bottom. So first I'm going to finish this left side and then the top part of the scene, and then I'm going to move on to the main subject, or the leaf. There isn't that much smudging with colored pencils, not even on this surface, but you know, just to make sure and to minimize the amount of smudging and blurring, I'm going to work in this order because I'm right-handed, so I work from left to right. And as an additional measure of precaution, I put a piece of glassine paper under my hand. So colored pencils, they don't really smudge much on regular paper. On this paper it's a little bit easier to move the pigment because the textured surface of this sandpaper, it grinds on the pencil and it leaves a little bit more residue that can be moved around a little bit. So I need to be aware of that as well. So you can see that this is the sort of texture that I'm trying to create. You can see that it looks sort of like muddy ground or something, or a mossy ground maybe, because there are some greenish tones there as well. And there are just a few of these larger cracks or shadow areas here and there. So what I'm trying to do with these small marks with a black pencil is I'm trying to imitate that variation in the terrain. Like there are maybe some dips and bumps in that muddy terrain. But here at the top, you can see that I used a little bit more of the black pencil, and I blended it a little bit with a brush. That's because I want the top part of the scene to appear a little bit less detailed. I'm filling in the rest of this area to the right because, like I said, I'm going to finish the top part of the scene first. I'm throwing in a little bit more of this nougat brownish color, and on top of that I'm going to use some black, but I'm going to use more black color at the top because I want that to be a little bit darker. I want that part of the scene to fade into dark, and I also want it to be less detailed. What I'm trying to accomplish is I'm trying to make that part of the background slightly out of focus, and I'm going to put a lot more detail and a lot more contrast in the foreground or in the part of the scene which is supposed to be closer to our viewpoint, and that's going to be the bottom part, the bottom area of the background. Anyway, I'm just filling in the rest of the paper here at the top on the right in much the same way that I did on the left, just trying to throw in a few cracks, some texture to indicate those small bumps and dips and lumps in the terrain. And at first it doesn't look like much, but if you're patient and if you keep working on producing that texture and creating that variation of lighter and darker shapes, you will end up something that looks like an uneven ground. And that's basically all I need, because most of the focus is going to be on the leaf, where I'm going to put in some additional detail, or I'm going to put in more detail. And I'm starting to work on the leaf. I'm working on this stem. I'm going to draw the edge around it with a slightly darker brownish color. This is Caput Mortuum. It's kind of like a dull reddish brown, and I've also used burnt sienna, which is a more saturated reddish brown. So I'm going to use those colors for some of the darker or shadow areas on the leaf. The other colors I'm going to use are some yellowish orange and let's say brownish orange colors, and I'm going to throw in a little bit of reddish color here and there as well, because the color of the leaf varies in different parts of it. So the stem is a little bit lighter here in the middle. First I drew the shadow or around the edge. I added some orangey tones, and then I added some lighter yellowish orange. So now I'm going to start working on the rest of the leaf once the stem is done. I had to finish that top part of the stem because on the left, because that wasn't in the reference, but like I said, I had to improvise and fill in some of the details. It's a leaf, so it's not a big deal if I improvise and if I simplify certain things. It's not like I'm drawing a portrait where I need to be very accurate. So as a base color for the leaf, I'm going to use some of these yellowish tones. I'm going to use a bit of that yellowish orange, and I'm going to use a bit of ochre, and around the edges especially I'm going to use some more orangey and reddish tones. Right now I'm using Sanguine, which is a dull orangey color, dull orangey light color, and I think it goes well. To make it darker in places, I simply use either Caput Mortuum or the burnt sienna. When I do these drawings in colored pencil, I don't really, I often tell you the names of some of the pencils I'm using, or I just try to describe them to you, but I don't really write down the numbers of the pencils or anything like that, because I can't really be bothered to do that, and honestly different people use different sets and different brands, so I think it's kind of pointless to do that. And also different people will perceive different colors in a different way, and they will achieve colors in a different way, so you know, everybody should adopt the approach that suits them best, or pick the pencils they like best. Anyway, I'm starting to work on these drops and droplets, and some of them are obviously smaller than the other ones, and I'm not working, I didn't start working with a white pencil immediately. I started working with a light grey pencil, and that's what I'm going to use for the most part. I use that light grey because it already creates a nice amount of contrast with that darker yellowish background, but also because I want to use the white pencil sparingly, so that those brightest parts of those drops would stand out, so that those reflections would stand out nicely. And another thing that I have to tell you about pencils is that for the black areas, for the black pencil, for the darker values, I actually used Kohinoor black pencil for two reasons. First, I don't have any more Faber-Castell black pencils, and the second reason is the Kohinoor black pencil is a little bit darker anyway, so I often use it along with the Faber-Castell black pencil. And here, because I will have to layer a lot in some parts of the scene, in order to make some parts of it extra dark or matte, I like to use that Kohinoor black pencil, which is a kind of a composite, because it feels like a colored pencil, but it's a little bit darker. It's almost like charcoal in appearance. Anyway, I'm starting to work on this middle part of the leaf. I filled in that shape with a base color. I threw in a couple of different colors. As you can see, I'm working with a burnt ochre and adding some lighter orange, a little bit of reddish brown tones around the edges, and I'm also using that darker reddish brown to draw those veins in the leaf. And then, of course, I just, on top of that, once the area is done, I just put in those details, those drops, with a light grey pencil. The drops are supposed to represent either raindrops or maybe drops of hue accumulated on the leaf. We can't see them on the ground because the ground probably soaked in the water, but they gathered on this relatively smooth surface of the leaf. So that's the only place in the scene where we're going to have them, mostly around the middle of the leaf, where some of those largest drops will be. So with the drops, you can see that I draw the shape with reddish brown pencil. I fill it in with a little bit of gray, and then I put the brightest details with a white pencil. For some of you who are new to these types of materials, you're probably going to ask me, well, what are those pencils? How can you put those lighter marks on top of the darker colors? It's not the pencils, it's the surface. The pencils are not important because you can do this with any type of colored pencils. The surface is more important because sandpaper allows you to put in multiple layers, and it allows you to work both from light to dark and from dark to light. So you can draw a darker layer and you can easily put lighter marks on top of that. This tip of the leaf here is a little bit reddish, so I'm using some Indian red. And then I'm going to make a transition towards the more yellowish colors with the ochre and sanguine and some others. So once again, as for the materials, the surface is far more important than the pencils, because any colored pencils will layer in a similar manner if you use sanded paper. I've used several different types of sanded papers. For my colored pencil drawings, I use these 1000 grit wet to dry sandpapers. You can buy these in a hardware store, by the way. And they work pretty well with both pastels and colored pencils. I use UArt artist quality sanded paper, which is an 800 grit. That's the finest one that I have. But that one is a little bit more suitable for pastels in my opinion, but it works with colored pencils as well. And I've used regular paper primed with clear gesso, regular drawing paper, but it has to be thicker paper primed with clear gesso. That will also give you a little bit of tooth so that you can put in a few extra layers. But I feel like this 1000 grit smooth, fine wet to dry sandpaper is probably the best surface for working with colored pencil. You can see a slightly larger drop there with a nice reflection. The reason why the reflection looks a little bit better on this one is because I used the white sparingly, and I'm going to try to do that in all of the other drops that I'm going to draw here in the middle, because there will be some larger ones there. So it's important to achieve that contrast, and in order for the brightest part of the that droplet to stand out, everything else around it needs to be at least a little bit darker. So value contrast is important for those reflective, shiny, lighter parts to stand out. So once again here I'm starting to work on another one. I drew the outline with a reddish brown and a little bit of shadow under it, and then I'm filling the middle with a light gray, because the drop is largely transparent but not entirely so, and then there are a couple of these lighter reflections which I put in with a white pencil, and they're really starting to look like raindrops or few drops of water and droplets of water gathering on the leaf. So I'm going to keep putting in those small shapes. Some of them are brighter than the others, some of them are a little bit larger than the others, so you want to have a little bit of variation in there. And of course, occasionally I will just draw some more of these darker details on the leaf using those burnt sienna or some other darker color to draw these veins of the leaf. And then I'll be filling in the rest with those yellowish and orangey colors. The entire drawing took much longer than I initially thought it would, simply because it's pretty detailed, and it's not a small drawing at all. So for me this is a medium-sized drawing, and I think it took at least 2 hours, if not more, which is a lot, I would say, for a relatively simple drawing. a relatively simple composition, but I needed to be patient and put a lot of detail into the background as well as the main part of the drawing, which is the leaf. And there are also some nice colors, so I had to play around with those as well to figure out what looks best. So what I'm trying to say is that even though this video here on YouTube is a combination of a real-time and time-lapse, occasionally I slow down the video so that you can see what I'm doing, but the entire drawing process was much longer and much slower. If you want to see those full-length videos, full-length narrated videos and stuff like that, you should check out my Patreon, because that's where they are. I have hundreds of them, obviously. Here on YouTube you can usually find, let's say, medium length videos. Here I'm adding a little bit of detail and texture with a reddish brown and even a touch of black. I want to have some of those darker specks and spots on the leaf, just to make the texture and the surface of the leaf look a little bit more interesting, because it is a dry leaf, so you want to have some of those spots on it, and some brownish details maybe. And occasionally I also use those darker colors to indicate variations in the shape, because it's kind of twisted and bent and curled up. This is the largest raindrop here in the middle, so I drew the outline with that burnt sienna, filled in the rest of it with grey, just a little bit, grazing the surface of those yellowish layers, and then once I add a little bit more of this brown on top, I'm going to use a little bit of nougat as well, just to see what kind of color that will give me. To increase the contrast, I can also add a touch of black. I know that it stands out too much now, but once I go over it with a little bit of this burnt sienna, it will start to look closer to what I wanted to achieve. It'll look more three-dimensional, but that darker color which I used won't be as conspicuous. And then there are a couple of reflections here with a white pencil, and that little drop, or the larger drop, is almost done. But we're going to have plenty more of them here in the middle, as well as the rest of the leaf. So I'm going to draw them in a similar manner, but I also need to draw some other details on the leaf. As you can see, I need to draw these veins, but I also need to cover the rest of the leaf with those base colors. I'm also using a little bit of gold yellow to make some of those central parts a little bit more yellowish and pale, and here and there I'm just drawing simple dots with a light gray pencil. I don't really need to put too much detail into those. I don't really need to try to define every single droplet. I can just draw some of them as tiny white dots, I suppose, because some of them are really small in the reference, from what I can tell. Some of them, obviously, like the one in the middle, are quite a bit larger. So I'm going to have a few more of those larger ones. And, you know, sometimes I can start by drawing the shape or the outline with a burnt sienna first, and sometimes I can just start with a lighter color. I can start with a light gray and then draw the edge around it later. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to finish the rest of the background here on the right, and here we're going to have obviously some more of those greenish and brownish tones, but as I move closer to the lower part of the scene, I'm going to be adding more and more shadow. So there's going to be more shadow under the leaf, because the leaf is supposed to be casting a shadow down because of the direction of the light source. And what that'll do, it'll help me integrate the leaf better into the scene, and it will make the whole thing a bit more three-dimensional, it will make the leaf stand out above the ground. Anyway, I'm putting in some other details on the background there. And now I'm just going to keep working on the leaf, adding mostly ochre and some other colors just to establish that base color. Now, when it comes to the whole coloring and the shading of the larger parts of the leaf, there are a couple of different approaches you can take. You can either try to block in the whole thing, or you can work bit by bit. So I kind of try to use a combination of these two approaches. I would go segment by segment. I would block in a segment and then work out the details, and then move on to another large segment and work out the details there, because it just works. That approach works better for me. I wouldn't want to make a whole mess by blocking in the whole thing and then have to work on the details, because I don't know, I would probably get impatient in the process. So this way, when I work little by little, I have that feeling of progress, and I am always sort of happy with the way that the drawing looks at that stage. And that's the way I have to approach these slightly more detailed drawings that take a little bit longer. Overall, I've used quite a number of different colors. I even threw in a little bit of beige and cinnamon colors, but not that they're really noticeable. I was kind of playing around with colors, but I think that the colors that dominate are ochre and maybe, I don't know, maybe some reddish browns. But I've used quite a number of colors here. If I were better with colors, I suppose I could reduce it to a smaller number of colors, but I don't know. I'm not an expert on colors and color theory. So I tend to sort of improvise and see what works best as I go along. So the lower part of the leaf, or the one that is closer to us, is also pretty much finished in terms of the color and the texturing. I just need to add some more of these droplets. And I'm going to add a whole bunch of them, obviously. But that too will take a little bit of time and work. Some of them are also gathering around the veins of the leaf. And here I took the approach of first putting in the light grey colors and light grey color, light grey shapes, and then working around them with burnt sienna to define the shape and the edges and the shadows around them and under them. And then, as a finishing touch, I put in a little bit of white pencil in some of them to make them more reflective, because what these drops are supposed to look like, they're supposed to look like a round, smooth, reflective surface. And I think I've largely managed to achieve that with most of them. But like I said, not all of them need to look perfect, and obviously some of them are going to be larger and more detailed than the others. Another thing that you may notice, and there's not much I can do about that, is that the colors in my video vary a little bit. So it depends on the way the camera adapts to my lighting, and my lighting obviously is not perfect. So I can't really guarantee that the colors in the video represent the colors on my drawing 100% accurately, but I'm trying to get it to look as close as possible. So here at the bottom I'm adding more shadow under the leaf, and here I'm going to put in the black color first to make this extra dark. So there's just going to be a small shadow area under the leaf there, and hopefully it'll make the whole shape of the leaf stand out nicely above the ground in that area. and indicate that this is a separate object with clean defined edges. I'm filling in the rest of the scene with the combination of green and brown and a little bit of ochre here and there, and a touch of Indian red as well. I want some reddish tones here. My background is obviously different than what you see in the reference because there are some other fallen leaves there. I didn't want to include those, but to capture the general idea of that scene, I would occasionally put in a little bit of that reddish color elsewhere in the background. So what I'm doing here is I'm working with a black pencil, basically doing what I did on the rest of the background, wiggling my hand, creating those small circular marks or back and forth marks, kind of scribbling around and creating that texture that will create an illusion of detail for the viewer, so that they feel like they're looking at muddy, uneven, mossy ground. And once that is finished, the drawing will be finished, because there's honestly not much else to do other than this bit of background at the bottom. But the important thing about this part of the background, I suppose, or the foreground, it's the foreground now because it's closer to our viewpoint, is that it has to be a little bit more detailed than the part of the scene at the top, because we're viewing this leaf at an angle, and the bottom part of the scene is obviously closest to our viewpoint, which means that the top part, which is further away, needs to appear less detailed. That is why I'm going to try to make those lines and details sharper in the foreground, and basically just leave more texture there while I blend it a bit more in the top part. So I want to create that out of focus look. And you can also see that thanks to that shadow area which I created under the leaf stands out and appears a little bit more three-dimensional. Just putting in some details here and there, kind of revisiting some of the parts of the background which I've already done, and finishing this part of the foreground area here in the bottom right portion of the drawing. I'm filling in these corners where the drawing was secured with a tape, removing them one by one, and just filling them with some black pencil marks or whichever colors are needed. Sometimes I go back and forth, and I go back in with lighter colors to make some of those lumps and bits of the terrain stand out a little bit better, to make the terrain appear a bit more three-dimensional, and also to include some of the colors to make the scene a bit more colorful, because it is an autumn scene. So I want some more of those reddish and brownish and yellowish colors in the background as well. But overall, I like the idea of a mostly greenish color in the background, because I think that it makes for a very nice contrast with the color of the leaf. And I'm just putting some lighter details with this light brown here and there to make some of those smaller lumps of dirt and mud stand out, make them look a bit more three-dimensional. So the drawing, as you can see, is now finished. I'm going to put my signature in the lower left corner, and that's it. The drawing's finished. This is what it looks like. Don't forget to check out my other videos, and like I said, for more content and longer videos, you should check out my Patreon. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.